AITA for refusing to take my turn hosting family dinners after everyone always bails on mine. Part 1. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and in my family, Sunday dinners have always been a tradition. Growing up, it was one of those things we all looked forward to, the whole family coming together, catching up on life, and enjoying a big meal. My parents, my siblings, and I all took turns hosting, and the idea was simple. Whoever's turn it was would handle cooking and setting everything up. It was a way for us to share the responsibility, and it also made sure everyone got a chance to contribute. For as long as I can remember, these dinners have been a cornerstone of our family culture. I loved the tradition, and when I moved out on my own, I was excited to keep it going. I put in a lot of effort when it was my turn. I'd spend hours planning the menu, making sure there were dishes everyone loved, even accommodating all the different preferences and dietary quirks my family has. If my sister wanted something vegetarian or my dad was craving a particular dessert, I'd make sure it was on the table. I would start prepping the night before, marinating meat, chopping vegetables, baking desserts. I made it an event, not just a meal, and I really enjoyed it. But over the past few months, something changed. It started to feel like I was the only one who cared about keeping this tradition alive. The first time it happened, it was just my sister, who canceled last minute. She sent a quick text saying she wasn't feeling well, and I didn't think much of it. I mean, it happens, right? People get sick. I just figured she'd join next time. My brother still came, but he was late, and it was pretty clear he was only there out of obligation. The next time it was my turn, the same thing happened, and I started to feel like maybe I was imagining things or overreacting. But it was hard to ignore the way my brother suddenly had work stuff that prevented him from coming. It caught me off guard because he's never had to work on Sundays before. He didn't give much detail, just a quick, vague text that made it clear he wasn't going to be there. I didn't want to push him, but it felt off. Then there was my sister, who said she was going to visit a friend who was only in town just for the weekend, so she wouldn't be able to make it either. That stung because she could have seen her friend any other time, but it felt like she chose that weekend to have an excuse not to come. It wasn't even a solid plan, just something she mentioned in passing, like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be out, won't make it, sorry." I was left with just my parents, who at least showed up, but even that didn't go as smoothly as I hoped. They arrived late, almost an hour after the time I'd told everyone to come. I had the roast sitting on the stove, sides warming in the oven, and a salad that was starting to wilt, but I tried to keep a smile on my face and pretend everything was fine. When they walked in, they didn't seem to notice how much effort I had put into everything. My dad made a quick comment about how good it smelled, but that was it. They didn't linger over the meal like we usually did, savoring each dish and chatting. Instead, they ate quickly and then said they needed to head out because they had errands to run. Errands. On a Sunday evening, when we were supposed to be spending time together. It was like the whole evening was just another thing they had to check off their list before moving on to whatever was more important. I had spent hours making a roast, seasoning it just right, marinating it overnight so it would be flavorful and tender. I made mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and even a fresh loaf of bread. I knew how much my mom loved homemade bread, so I made it from scratch, kneading the dough until my arms were sore and letting it rise while I prepped everything else. I thought about what everyone liked and tried to incorporate a bit of that into the meal. It was exhausting, but I didn't mind if it meant everyone would come together and enjoy it. But instead, it felt like all of that effort was for nothing. I was just disappointed. It wasn't about the food. It was the feeling that no one seemed to care, like they all had somewhere better to be. I started noticing a pattern after that. It wasn't just a one-off thing, it was happening consistently. Whenever it was my mom's turn to host, everyone was there. No one had last-minute excuses, no one canceled an hour before. My brother would even show up early to help set the table or bring over a bottle of wine. When my dad hosted, it was the same story. My sister would bring some dessert she'd baked, and everyone would be there on time, sitting around the table, joking and laughing like the old days. They'd stay late, and sometimes we'd end up playing cards or watching a movie, just enjoying each other's company. But when it was my turn, it was like pulling teeth trying to get them to commit. I'd send messages in the group chat, and it would be radio silence, or worse, half-hearted maybes that would turn into sorry, can't make it on the day of. I'd always have tons of leftovers because I'd prepared for the whole family, but only a few would actually show. I'd be left packing up containers of food, trying not to feel like I was the only one who still cared about these dinners. But the worst part was last month. I thought if I planned something special, maybe that would get everyone excited, so I went all out. I decided to make stuffed chicken breasts, roasted veggies, homemade bread, and a chocolate cake that's a family favorite. It was the kind of cake that everyone would fight over for the last slice, rich, moist, with a layer of ganache on top. I spent most of Saturday prepping. I was marinating the chicken, chopping vegetables, letting the bread dough rise, and whisking together the batter for the cake. I had this image in my head of everyone sitting around, eating and chatting, and maybe even complimenting how nice everything was. But then Sunday morning rolled around, and my phone started buzzing. My sister was the first to cancel. She sent a quick text saying she just wasn't up for it, which seemed like a weak excuse. I couldn't help but think she hadn't even planned on coming. She just didn't want to be the first to say no. Then my brother sent a vague message saying he had some work stuff that came up, which I knew was probably just an excuse. It was always work stuff lately, even though he never used to work weekends. My parents still came, but they didn't show up until almost an hour late. I'd been keeping the food warm, but by the time they arrived, everything had lost its freshness. The bread was a little too crusty, the vegetables weren't as crisp, and I had to reheat the chicken. It was like they didn't notice how much effort I'd put into everything. We barely even got through dessert before they were saying they had to leave because they wanted to catch some sale at a store. I remember standing there, watching them gather their things, and just feeling numb. I had spent all of Saturday preparing this meal, waking up early on Sunday to finish everything, and in the end, it felt like none of it mattered. I was left with a ton of food, enough to feed twice as many people as actually showed up. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at all the leftovers, and I felt like a fool. I tried talking to my family about it afterward, asking if there was something I was doing wrong, or if maybe they just weren't into Sunday dinners anymore. My dad brushed it off and said I was being overly sensitive. He said sometimes people have other things going on, and that's just life. My mom said maybe I was putting too much pressure on myself to make everything perfect, and that's why I was feeling this way, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about perfection, it was about feeling like my effort mattered and that they wanted to be there. I wanted them to be excited about coming over, the way they were when it was someone else's turn to host. Then, last week, it was my mom's turn to host, and guess what? Everyone was there, no excuses, no last-minute cancellations. My brother even left work early so he could get there on time. My sister brought a homemade appetizer, and everyone stayed late, laughing and reminiscing, like nothing was wrong. I was happy to be there, but I couldn't help but feel a bit hurt. It was clear that when it was my mom's turn, everyone made the effort, so why not for me? This week, it's supposed to be my turn again, and I just don't want to do it. I don't want to spend hours cooking, setting the table, and getting excited about everyone coming over just to end up feeling let down again. So, I told my family that I was thinking of skipping my turn and letting someone else host. I wasn't rude about it, I just said I wasn't up for it this time, and maybe we could figure something else out. But my dad was quick to call me out, saying I was being dramatic and that this was just how family was sometimes. My mom said I should stop trying to read into things and just enjoy the time we do get to spend together. My brother didn't say much, but my sister looked a bit annoyed, like she thought I was making a big deal out of nothing. I tried explaining how it felt to be the only one putting in effort and then being let down, but it didn't seem to land. My dad just kept saying I needed to let it go and that I was overthinking it, but I don't think I am. I think it's unfair that everyone expects me to host and put in the effort, but when it's my turn, no one can be bothered to show up. Part 2. So, after that last dinner, I decided I wasn't going to put myself through it again. It wasn't like I came to this decision easily. It was more like a slow realization that crept up on me over the past few months. Each time I hosted and nobody showed, it chipped away at how much I enjoyed doing it. It's hard to stay enthusiastic when it feels like no one cares. I thought a lot about it during the week after that last dinner, running the whole evening over and over in my head, and every time I remembered how I had stood there with all that food, I just felt more and more ridiculous. I started questioning myself, wondering if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe I was making too big of a deal out of this. But then I'd remember how they'd all been there, no problem, the week before at my mom's place, and suddenly, I didn't feel so crazy anymore. It was obvious they could make the effort if they wanted to. They just didn't want to for me, and I wasn't sure why. I tried talking to them about it, and they brushed me off, made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, but I knew it wasn't right. It's not unreasonable to expect people to show up when they say they will, especially when you're making a big effort to host. So this time, when it was my turn to host again, I decided I wasn't going to bother. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't send a message to the family group chat saying I wasn't hosting. I just didn't do anything. No menu planning, no grocery shopping, no hours spent in the kitchen making sure everything was perfect. I didn't want to set myself up for disappointment again. I figured, if they didn't care enough to show up when I put in the effort, then there was no point in putting in the effort at all. If they had something to say about it, maybe they'd realize how it felt to be the one left hanging. Sunday rolled around, and I spent the day relaxing. For once, I wasn't stressing over making sure everything was perfect, and it was actually kind of nice. I watched some TV, took a long bath, and didn't think about cooking even once. There was a part of me that wondered if I should at least send a message, let everyone know I wasn't hosting, but I didn't. I didn't see why I had to be the one to make everything clear. If they wanted to show up, they could, but I wasn't going to twist myself into knots for it anymore. I was fully expecting it to be just another Sunday evening where I'd end up alone, scrolling through my phone or maybe ordering takeout, but then, around the usual time for dinner, I heard a knock at the door. I remember pausing, almost in disbelief, because it wasn't like anyone usually came when it was my turn. I opened the door, and there they were, my brother, my sister, and my parents, all standing there, looking like they had just come from my mom's place or something. They had this air of casualness, like it was no big deal to show up, and they were holding a couple of bottles of wine and a dessert. It was the first time in months that they'd all been there, together, at my place, on a Sunday. I felt this weird mix of emotions, like I was glad to see them, but also confused, and maybe a little annoyed. They walked in, all smiles, chatting and taking off their coats, and my mom asked, "So, what did you make?" as she set the wine on the counter. My dad was looking around, and my brother and sister had already started wandering into the living room, like they expected to sit down and start dinner any minute. I stood there, not sure how to respond at first, because this wasn't how I thought the evening was going to go. I hadn't prepared anything. There wasn't a single thing cooking in the kitchen. I didn't even have a backup plan, like some snacks or easy stuff I could throw together. It was just me and an empty kitchen. I told them I hadn't made anything, that I didn't plan on cooking because I didn't think anyone was going to come. I thought maybe they'd get it. Maybe they'd understand how frustrating it was to put in all that work and then have no one show up, but instead, they looked confused, shocked even. My brother was the first to say something, and he looked at me like I'd done something wrong. He said, "But it's your turn to host," as if that was the only thing that mattered. I couldn't believe it. Here they were, finally showing up on a night I hadn't done anything, and now they were going to tell me I should have been ready because it was my turn. It felt like a punch to the gut. I'd been begging them to show up for weeks, months even, and they always had some excuse. But now, the one time I didn't cook, they were here, acting like I was the one who had let them down. I explained how I felt, how it hurt that every time it was my turn, they seemed to have other plans or couldn't be bothered to make it. I told them how it felt to spend hours preparing a meal only for them to cancel last minute, or barely show up at all, and how that made me not want to bother anymore. I thought, maybe, they'd see it from my side, but they didn't. Instead, they acted like I was overreacting, like I was the one ruining the evening. My sister said it wasn't fair for me to just decide not to cook when it was my turn, like I'd somehow broken the rules of this unspoken agreement. My dad said I was being dramatic, that it was just one night, and I should have told them if I wasn't planning to host. They stayed for a bit, kind of milling around awkwardly, not sure what to do with themselves now that there wasn't a dinner. My mom tried to make small talk, but it felt forced, and my dad kept glancing at his watch, like he was already thinking about when they could leave. They didn't bring it up again, but the whole atmosphere was tense, and it felt like they were disappointed in me, like I had failed some test by not having everything ready. After a while, they all left, taking the wine and the dessert with them, and I was left alone, standing in the quiet of my apartment, trying to figure out how everything had gotten so messed up. Part 3. After that Sunday, things felt off between me and my family. I didn't hear from them right away, which didn't surprise me. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd hear from them at all. Part of me thought they'd just ignore what happened, pretend it never happened, and we'd all go on like usual. I was almost hoping that would be the case because I didn't want to deal with any more awkwardness or arguments. But about a day or two later, my phone started buzzing, and the messages started pouring in. First, it was my mom. She sent me a long text, trying to be diplomatic but also very clear in her message. She said she understood that I was upset and that she was sorry if I felt hurt, but then she went on to say that it wasn't right for me to just skip out on my responsibility to host. She reminded me how important these dinners were to the family and how they'd been a tradition for so long. She even mentioned how she and my dad had looked forward to it, how they'd planned their day around coming to my place, and how disappointed they were to arrive and find out there was nothing. She kept saying things like, "It's not about the food, it's about the effort," which felt like a slap in the face because I'd been putting in the effort for months and getting nothing in return. Then, my brother sent a message in our group chat, and it was less gentle. He didn't bother with apologies. He just straight up said that I was wrong for not hosting and that if I had an issue, I should have brought it up before dinner. He said that the family rotates hosting for a reason, and that everyone's expected to do their part, including me. He made it sound like I'd shirked my duty, like I'd done something selfish, which was infuriating because where was all this concern about doing their part when it was my turn and they couldn't be bothered to show up? But I guess when they actually decided to come for once, and I wasn't ready, suddenly it was a huge issue. My sister's message was the one that really got under my skin. She said she felt hurt and blindsided by my decision not to cook, and that it was immature of me to pull something like that without warning. She kept saying that the family expected me to be ready, and that my choice to just not do it was like playing games. She even went on about how they'd all made time in their schedules to be there, how it wasn't easy for everyone to coordinate, and that I was disrespecting their time by not following through. Disrespecting their time, I couldn't believe it. What about all the times they'd bailed on me last minute, with barely any notice or even just a half-hearted excuse? Apparently, that was fine, but if I didn't meet their expectations one time, I was the one being rude. It felt like I was being ganged up on, and their messages kept coming. They made it clear that they wanted this issue to be settled before the next dinner, which was in 2 weeks. They said they didn't want any more surprises, and that I should be prepared to host next time, no tricks or games. They made it sound like I'd done something sneaky, like my decision not to cook was some kind of calculated move to make them look bad. But the truth was, I just didn't see the point in going through all that effort again when it felt like they never appreciated it. And then, to top it all off, they said that since I hadn't cooked last time, I would need to make it up by helping out at the next dinner, which my dad was hosting. They suggested that I come over early to help with prep, set the table, and make sure everything was ready before everyone else arrived. It was like they were punishing me for standing up for myself, like I had to prove I was still part of the family by bending over backward to make up for something they thought I'd done wrong. They didn't see it as a way to come together or compromise. They framed it as my responsibility to earn back their trust, as if I'd broken some unwritten rule by refusing to cook that one night. I was stunned. I just couldn't believe how they were twisting this around. They kept saying they understood why I was upset, but their actions showed the complete opposite. If they really understood, they wouldn't be piling on more expectations and treating me like I'd done something unforgivable. It felt like they were missing the point entirely. I didn't need them to lecture me about traditions and responsibilities. I needed them to acknowledge that I'd been trying to keep this tradition alive on my own for months, and they'd been the ones dropping the ball. But instead of even considering that they might have had a role in why I decided not to cook, they all just zeroed in on me, acting like I was the one who had let them down. It hurt more than I expected it to. I had hoped that maybe, after what happened, they'd realize that something wasn't right, that maybe they'd actually ask why I felt like I couldn't go through with it anymore. I thought they might want to talk about how we could fix things, how we could make it so these dinners felt like a shared effort again. But they didn't want to fix anything, they just wanted me to fall in line, to go back to playing my part without complaining. And now, they wanted me to make up for something I didn't even think was wrong in the first place. So, am I the asshole for refusing to host this time around? I know it's a family tradition, and I don't want to ruin that, but I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one who cares.